Can I just say one thing, please? I considered the legendary Stanley Kubrick to be an actor's adversary. He did, in fact, 100 takes. He was an actor's worst enemy, and I can name films in which he starred that have the worst acting I've ever seen. At the age of 94, Robert Duvall finally revealed identities he had been silent about for decades. The Oscar-winning icon revealed the 4 performers he couldn't bear to work on the same set as him in a shocking no-holds-barred moment. He added plainly ego, laziness, and no damn respect for the craft. The names that Robert Duvall reveals in his candor are profound. Who made the list will surprise you. Kubrick, Stanley. Even though Stanley Kubrick is regarded as one of the best actors in cinema, not everyone in the business shared this admiration. The Oscar-winning actor Robert Duvall was one vocal opponent of Kubrick's directing style. When questioned about Kubrick's method of dealing with actors, Duvall, who is well known for his strong sense of creative integrity and no-nonsense attitude toward the discipline of acting, did not hold back. Duvall made the audacious claim that Stanley Kubrick is an actor's enemy in a rare and shocking interview, which rocked the movie industry. Kubrick's infamous insistence for excessive repetition on set was the main target of Duvall's criticism. In an attempt to get what he considered the ideal performance, Kubrick was notorious for putting his performers through dozens or even hundreds of takes for a single scene. This approach produced emotionally unvarnished, memorable depictions according to some. For Duvall, however, it indicated a basic misinterpretation of the actor's methodology. How is he able to distinguish between the first and 70th takes? Duvall made a rhetorical challenge. He believed that Kubrick's meticulousness did not equate to creative brilliance. Rather, he perceived it as compulsive control, a way to mentally and physically tire performers until they were nothing more than vehicles for Kubrick's vision, lacking any individual creativity or spontaneity. Duvall felt that instead of working with his players, Kubrick controlled and exploited them, depriving them of the exact humanity that actors try to infuse into their parts. Duvall was not shy in providing concrete examples. He cited 2 of Kubrick's best-known films, The Shining and A Clockwork Orange, as proof that the filmmaker did not value actors as collaborators. Duvall considered those performances to be some of the worst he had ever seen in big motion pictures, especially Malcolm McDowell's unsettling turn as Alex DeLarge and Jack Nicholson's frenzied portrayal of Jack Torrance. These performances were iconic to many. They were overworked, coerced, and ultimately worthless results of submission rather than cooperation, in Duvall's opinion. These statements were a far cry from the public awe Kubrick usually enjoyed. The majority of performers, including those who had undergone arduous training under his tutelage, spoke in a respectful manner and used their words sparingly. For example, Shelley Duvall spoke about the psychological toll of working on The Shining, where she had to suffer persistent emotional tension and 127 takes of a single scene. Although she had expressed the agony she had gone through, she refrained from categorically denouncing Kubrick's method. In contrast, Robert Duvall was not interested in softening his opinion. His candor pierced the mythology surrounding Kubrick, presenting him as a filmmaker who cared nothing about the welfare or dignity of the actors who acted in his films rather than as a genius misinterpreted by less intelligent people. Respect was the crux of the issue for Duvall. A truly great director, in his opinion, recognized the significance of the actor-director relationship, one based on cooperation and mutual trust rather than dominance. A director should inspire, not intimidate, and guide rather than depress. Duvall believed that Kubrick had betrayed that holy relationship by relying on emotional coercion and excessive takes. "There's no forgiveness," Duvall said bluntly. He believed that no shot, no performance, and no cinematic masterpiece were worth the psychological harm done to those who made it possible. Strong directors were nothing new to Duvall himself, it should be noted. He had collaborated with some of the industry's top talent, including Sidney Lumet, Robert Altman, and Francis Ford Coppola. He understood what it was like to be creatively challenged, but he also understood the difference between being encouraged to perform to the best of one's abilities and being coerced or humiliated. A key component of Duvall's worldview was that distinction. He admired filmmakers who reciprocated his admiration, who viewed acting as an equal component of the filmmaking process rather than a means of subjugation. By expressing his disapproval, Robert Duvall became one of the few well-known actors who ventured to challenge Stanley Kubrick's legacy. Duvall's candor provided a unique contrast to the typical adulation, even though the majority of Hollywood were reluctant to damage the director's reputation. His comments acted as a reminder that people, actors, technicians, and artists, are the driving force behind every great work of film, and their experiences are just as important as the finished product. Duvall felt that the price of genius was too high in Kubrick's situation. Hathaway Henry. Some of the most recognizable roles in American film can be found in Robert Duvall's illustrious multi-decade acting career, but not all of the projects resulted in creative synergy or enjoyable recollections. One of the more controversial moments in Duvall's early career was when he and Henry Hathaway, the director of the 1969 Western classic True Grit, battled angrily on the set. Duvall's memories of creating authentic grit are still tainted by personal frustration and professional strain, even in light of the movie's lasting significance and economic success, particularly as the part that ultimately garnered John Wayne his Oscar. One of the most talked about behind-the-scenes feuds of its age was the one involving Duvall and Hathaway. An experienced director with a harsh dictatorial approach, Hathaway was not amenable to players who questioned his tactics or questioned his authority. Robert Duvall, on the other hand, was an actor with a strong foundation in the art, who was dedicated to the realism and depth of his characters and didn't hesitate to voice his concerns. The two guys symbolized a philosophical and generational gap. While Duvall was a member of the new generation of performers schooled in the technique, emphasizing emotional realism and internal truth, Hathaway represented the strict command-driven filmmaking of the studio age. Their personalities clashed right from the start of the shoot. Later, Duvall admitted to the conflict, saying plainly in interviews, "I didn't get along with the director." He hinted that Hathaway was not particularly interested in the kind of subtle performance Duvall was attempting to give. "I don't get along with a lot of directors," he said. There was conflict rather than cooperation. Hathaway probably thought Duvall's aggressiveness was impolite, while Duvall felt micromanaged and restricted. As filming went on, what started off as a professional dispute became into outright animosity. On-set morale started to suffer as a result of the tense environment. Co-star John Wayne, who portrayed the now iconic Rooster Cogburn, a guy recognized for his imposing presence both on and off-screen, was involved in one incident that would go down in history. When insubordination interfered with the production, Wayne was not one to put up with it. When Wayne finally confronted him, Duvall said, the tension reached a boiling point. Wayne reportedly threatened to punch Duvall out if he didn't stop arguing with Hathaway because he was frustrated by the continuous arguments. Whether uttered in rage or as a firm attempt to re-establish order, the incident established a distinct division between the two performers' approaches on the set. Despite being admired for his skill, Duvall was the only one who disagreed with Hathaway's domineering guidance. Duvall never went on to fully attack Hathaway in subsequent years, despite their hostility. He avoided personal jabs and in-depth critiques. But his reluctance to provide further details spoke a lot. In later interviews, when questioned about Hathaway, Duvall frequently responded with cryptic statements such, "We won't talk about him." That abrupt rejection, which was given in a tone of finality, suggested deeper wounds and unresolved resentment. Duvall had no desire to relive the experience, but it was evident that it had left a mark. The rivalry became part of Hollywood history, and only contributed to the film's mythology. In the end, True Grit was a success, solidifying Wayne's legacy in film, and introducing the Western genre to a new audience. But rather than being a victorious chapter, the movie was a creative torment for Duvall. He subsequently characterized the experience as one of the most challenging of his career, not because of the job per se, but rather because of the ongoing conflicts with a director who, in his opinion, showed little regard for the actor's contribution and process. For Duvall, Hathaway wasn't the only issue. It was a structural problem in the sector. He openly discussed the challenges of dealing with directors who didn't get actors or wouldn't compromise with them in a number of interviews. The statement, "I don't get along with a lot of directors" was repeated by him. This wasn't a brag, but rather a reflection of his conviction that genuine cooperation was uncommon in Hollywood. According to Duvall, a director should provide an environment where performers could really inhabit their roles, rather than merely giving commands or enforcing strict control. Even so, Duvall's performance in True Grit is a testament to his professionalism. Despite the backstage commotion, he gave a strong and memorable portrayal of the outlaw Ned Pepper, holding his own alongside the towering presence of John Wayne. His battles with Hathaway spoke to a larger struggle to preserve the integrity of his craft in an industry that frequently valued efficiency and hierarchy over artistry. Bruce Beresford. Robert Duvall's reputation as a fiercely principled and intensely dedicated actor frequently led him into conflict with directors who didn't share or accommodate his unwavering commitment to authenticity. It serves as a reminder that even in the most difficult environments, Duvall's commitment to the role never wavered. He brought depth and intensity to every scene, regardless of his frustrations behind the camera. The most notable of these confrontations occurred during the filming of Tender Mercies 1983, a role that would later win Duvall the Academy Award for Best Actor. Other confrontations were more subdued, but no less illuminating, such as his direct criticism of Stanley Kubrick, or his confrontations with Henry Hathaway. Tender Mercies told the story of Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer looking for peace and redemption in a small Texas town. But the behind-the-scenes creative process was characterized by moments of genuine tension, particularly between Duvall and director Bruce Beresford, even though the finished product was a critical triumph. Duvall's deeply internal performance, which was hailed by critics for its quiet strength and vulnerability, served as the foundation for the film's emotional restraint and subtle power. However, beneath that poignant portrayal was a creative tug-of-war that reflected Duvall's ingrained conviction that a character's emotional core should always be protected. Even with a more subdued director, Duvall's need for creative input and control was as strong as ever, and from the beginning, he approached Tender Mercies not just as an actor, but as a steward of the film's emotional truth. Bruce Beresford, an Australian director renowned for his gentle demeanor and thoughtful direction, was not the kind of domineering presence that Duvall had previously clashed with. Due to his strong belief in Max Sledge and his personal responsibility to maintain the integrity of that portrayal, Duvall was not merely providing notes, rather he was advocating for changes, expressing his vision, and occasionally overriding Beresford's directorial decisions. According to set reports, Duvall often argued with Beresford over important creative choices. These were deeper disputes over tone, tempo, and the emotional framing of sequences rather than petty disputes over blocking or line delivery. Duvall was known to support certain edits, and was said to have a great deal of control over the staging and shooting of scenes. Although the actor was never officially acknowledged as co-directing, other accounts claim that their contribution was close to it. Even though Beresford was not known for dramatic confrontations, the production suffered from the frequent tensions with Duvall, who reportedly stormed off the set on multiple occasions to protest decisions he felt compromised the authenticity of the story or his character. Even so, the tension between Duvall and Beresford never boiled over into full-on hostility. In interviews, Duvall rarely spoke negatively about the director, perhaps out of respect for the finished product or because the disagreements were based more on creative passion than personal dislike. It was not a volatile breakdown of communication, but rather an ongoing power struggle between an actor unwilling to compromise on his deeply held convictions and a director trying to steer the film as a whole. Duvall gave a performance of rare emotional depth that gave the film a quiet, grounded dignity and helped make it a classic. Beresford later admitted the challenges of working with Duvall, calling him very intense and deeply invested in his performance, saying that although the process could be challenging, the results were undeniable. Duvall's behavior on set was motivated by an unwavering devotion to the character he was playing, not by ego or dominance. Rather, it was about art.
For him, Max Sledge was more than just a role. It was a life he had to live completely and without compromise, and he had to fight against any directing choice that threatened to weaken that reality. Beresford found this resistance frustrating, but in the end, it helped create a film that was as emotionally impactful as it was artistically restrained. Duvall's Oscar victory for Tender Mercies was a moment of validation for both his performance and his ferocious defense of the acting craft, underscoring the notion that sometimes the most impactful performances don't come from complete harmony on set, but rather from creative friction that pushes everyone involved to a higher standard. The Beresford-Duvall tension represents a more nuanced chapter in Duvall's history of director conflicts, unlike the explosive fallout with Henry Hathaway, or the ideological contempt he expressed towards Stanley Kubrick's methods. His disputes with Beresford were based on mutual respect, even if they were emotionally taxing. In the years since Tender Mercies, the film has become a touchstone for subtle storytelling, with Duvall's performance at its core. They paint a picture of an artist who saw no distinction between principle and performance, someone for whom the stakes of authenticity were always worth fighting for, even at the risk of alienating collaborators. Growing pains that helped shape the film's quiet power are now seen as part of the film's journey, thanks to the creative struggles that marked its production. Duvall's experience reinforced a core truth that he carried with him throughout his career, that acting at its best is a sacred craft, and that protecting it sometimes means standing alone in the face of opposition, no matter how softly it's spoken. According to Pauline Kael, one name in particular caught Duvall's attention, the renowned film critic Pauline Kael. Although Kael is considered to be one of the most influential voices in 20th century film criticism, Duvall never forgot or forgave what he perceived as her failure to grasp the true essence of his craft. Duvall's most biting criticisms were not always directed at directors or fellow actors, but rather at the critics who watched from the sidelines and made judgments. Duvall was blunt in a 2017 interview, dismissing Kael with brutal simplicity, encapsulating decades of frustration in a single sentence: she was a fraud. Duvall's animosity toward Kael has deep roots, dating back to her disdainful review of Tender Mercies 1983, the movie for which Duvall won his first and only Academy Award for Best Actor. One for many, it was a masterwork of subtle acting, but for Kael it was insufficient. Her review of Tender Mercies was noticeably cool, if not dismissive. For Duvall, the role of Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer seeking redemption, was intensely personal. It was a performance of subtlety and restraint, stripped of grandstanding, and relying instead on the quiet truths of human vulnerability. Kael's words struck a chord for an actor like Duvall, who believed deeply in the power of internal emotional truth, and who had spent his entire career choosing authenticity over flash, as she criticized the film for its lack of stylistic flair and slow pace, and her tone indicated that she found Duvall's performance too subtle to be compelling. It wasn't just that she didn't like Tender Mercies, it was that she didn't understand it, and that was unforgivable to Duvall. Kael's larger body of work only made him dislike the movie even more. He saw her criticism as a rejection of everything he valued about acting, not just a slight against the movie. In particular, he criticized her well-known support of 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, which she celebrated as a turning point in American cinema, and which Kael praised for its daring editing, stylized violence, and youthful energy, qualities that Duvall viewed as the very definition of superficiality. To him, Bonnie and Clyde was the type of flashy, substance-driven filmmaking that critics like Kael enthusiastically embraced while rejecting more subdued, emotionally grounded work. In his opinion, Kael was part of a movement that rewarded directors and performers who made a splash, even if that splash lacked emotional truth. He said that Kael didn't understand actors, summarizing his contempt with a sentence that went beyond Kael herself. Where she saw revolution, Duvall saw noise. Kael represented a critic who valued provocation over depth, cleverness over craft. Duvall's attack on Kyle was especially striking, coming from someone known for his quiet intensity, not a Hollywood loudmouth or publicity seeker, and it reflected a broader frustration with a critical establishment that, in his opinion, had too often valued cinematic gimmicks over the soul of performance. But when it came to Kyle, he didn't hold back, and that unvarnished honesty showed how personally he took her criticism. For Duvall, acting was a sacred craft, not a game or a fad, and his career was based on honesty, nuance and restraint, performances that garnered respect through depth rather than showmanship. It was a betrayal not only to him but to the entire profession to be dismissed by someone he viewed as a tastemaker, who lacked the requisite knowledge of that craft. It is important to note that Pauline Kael had long caused division in the film industry. She was admired for her wit and unwavering opinions, but she also had many critics, actors, filmmakers, and even fellow critics who felt that her influence came with a tendency toward arrogance. That sentiment was reflected in Duvall's comments, which went beyond simply criticizing her reviews to questioning her authority to write them in the first place. By labeling her a fraud, he was not disparaging her taste but rather her credibility. Although his remarks were personal, Duvall's hatred for Kyle was based on principle. He didn't blame critics for not liking his work. He couldn't stand what he perceived as superficial analysis masquerading as insight. He felt that criticism had an obligation to delve into a film's soul in order to try to grasp its emotional core and intent, and that Kyle and critics like her had fallen short of that standard. Being misunderstood was a constant occupational hazard for an actor whose best work often lay in silence and stillness, but when critics missed the mark, when they failed to recognize the power and restraint, it was more than just frustrating. It was a form of erasure. Duvall's relationship with criticism in general was complex, and he avoided reading reviews of his work most of the time, but he remained acutely aware of how critical narratives shape public perception. Duvall's criticism of Kyle speaks to a number of his remarks serve as a reminder that even the most renowned reviewers are susceptible to the prejudices and blind spots that come with personal taste, and they contribute to a broader discussion about the gap between creators and critics, between those who make and those who criticize, and they show the emotional toll that criticism can have, especially on artists who invest parts of themselves in their work. Robert Duvall left behind a legacy of unwavering artistic integrity. He never apologized for standing his ground. He fought for the emotional truth of his characters, and he refused to compromise when it came to performance. What do you think about the actors that Robert Duvall despises? Tell us in the comments section below. His rejection of Pauline Kael wasn't just a personal grudge. It was an assertion of values. It was the voice of an actor who dedicated his life to pursuing honesty on screen and refusing to let that honesty be denigrated by those who, in his opinion, never truly understood it. We sincerely hope you have found this video useful, and if you do, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for seeing, and we hope to see you in our next films.